The epistle lesson this morning is taken from the letter to the Hebrews. A long letter, very much centered on who Jesus is. Maybe originally to a congregation, perhaps not too unlike this one. These verses from chapter 11 are found on page 226 in the New Testament portion of your Pew Bible. And what should I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched raging fire, escaped the edge of the sword, won strength out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received their dead by resurrection. Others were tortured, refusing to accept release in order to obtain a better resurrection. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned to death. They were sawn in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, persecuted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains and in caves and in holes in the ground. Yet, all these, though they were commended for their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better, so that they would not, apart from us, be made whole. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
If we went around the room and each one of us said what we had done this summer, some of us would say we had attended a family reunion. I'd be on that list. My mother-in-law was one of 9 children. My husband has 14 cousins. 2 are deceased, but 13 remain, and all have spouses and children, and most have grandchildren. In 2003, some of the cousins got together and planned the first Wernicke Cousins reunion. So here we were this summer, some 10 years later, with the 6th such reunion. We gather every year in South Fork, Colorado, where my husband Glenn and I have a cabin, and where most of the cousins vacationed when they were children. So we got together, as many families do. And one of the things we do, I suspect everybody does, is to talk about each other. Who has done what? What medical procedure did we have to have done now? What are the kids doing? And of course, do you remember when we did such and such? But that's what families do. We talk to one another. We talk about one another. We express joy or sorrow or concern for one another. We care for one another. And is this not true in the church family, particularly in the life of a particular special congregation? What one of us in a time of joy do not expect and welcome spoken congratulations, tangible tokens of support, often in the form of food. What one of us in a time of grief or sadness or sorrow do not expect and welcome spoken expressions of this sadness and concern, as well as tangible tokens of support, often in the form of food. Now, in congregations of this size, often the whole congregation is involved. In larger sized congregations, it may be a small group, perhaps a geographically composed care team, or maybe a women's circle or a Sunday school class or the choir. But here's the point. We live in a community, a family, a neighborhood, a church, an organization, a volunteer work of some kind. And we're in it together. Now, for those of us in the Christian community, we have a very clear mandate in Scripture for this kind of connectionalism. Now, for those of us who live as Presbyterian type Christians, we also find this mandate reflected in our form of government and how we make decisions, but that's a topic for another day. For today, the Scriptures lead us to remember this mandate, to see what difference it makes in our lives, to see what difference it makes here at Westminster in this particular time of transition. First of all, the Scripture. Our Old Testament lesson is the call of Jeremiah. Now, often when we study this passage, we focus on how young Jeremiah was and how inexperienced he feels about this new work. Sometimes we focus on the initiative of God, for Jeremiah clearly does not wake up one day and say, I think I'll be a prophet when I grow up. It's clearly God who is setting the agenda here. But I would like to focus our attention for today on the audience of Jeremiah's work. And it's clearly plural. Jeremiah's prophetic work is not done in isolation. He's assigned to speak to everybody that God sends him to nations, notice plural nations, to kingdoms, notice plural kingdoms. Even way back in the 7th century BC, they were in it together. Now, the letter to the Hebrews is clearly addressed to a group of people, and as I said, probably a congregation. It's very focused specifically on the supremacy and sufficiency of Jesus Christ for our salvation. That apart from the Gospels, it is one of the most Christocentric books in the whole of the New Testament. In the 4th verse of the 1st chapter, Jesus is described as more excellent than the angels, or much more superior, as the New RSV puts it. That message continues with the affirmation that in Jesus we find a better hope, a better covenant, better promises, a better inheritance. So for some 10 chapters, the author of this letter goes on to lay this firm foundation for our faith. But then beginning in chapter 11, the author does an interesting thing. He or she shifts us to the community, to the faith community that surrounds its Lord. And the first verses of chapter 11 will be familiar to you. Now, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. By faith, our ancestors, those people behind us, our ancestors received approval. And then there are 28 long verses. We get a recitation of all these faithful people: Abel, Noah, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, and finally we get to verse 32. And instead of long stories, the pace quickens. Time fails me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, prophets, etc., 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 etc. And then, in verse 39, there is a startling, I think, pronouncement. Yet, all these people behind us, our ancestors in faith, all these, though they were commended for their faith, did not receive what was promised. Now, I do not think the accurate response to that is, this is the word of the Lord. I think it's, well, crumb. What do you mean they didn't get what was promised? How come they didn't get their reward? What about the promises of salvation? Even to those ancient people who were faithful in the only way they knew. What about the sufficiency of Jesus? What does this verse mean? I do think it's an amazing verse, an amazing pronouncement that our faith ancestors have not yet received what was promised. Why not? Because we are in this together. The next verse. Since God has provided something better so that they would not, apart from us, be made perfect. Friends, we are in this together until we, that means y'all too back here, faithful participants in God's kingdom, no one wins. No one goes forward into the consummation of God's plan. No one. Tom Long, in his commentary on the book of Hebrews, lifts up this particular image of how this works. Long writes about the parabola of salvation, this kind of shape that we learned in some field of math that I long forgot. The parabola of salvation is a chain of faithful people holding on to the cord and to each other. And there is a gap in the line of the faithful, a space in the ark to be filled by those who hear the gospel. We are to step up to the cord, Long writes, and join with those who through the ages held on only by faith. It is the formation of this unbroken community of faith that enables God to make perfect the community and to grant to all the fulfillment of the promises. I believe this means that the task of a congregation in any time, but particularly in a transition time, is to reflect on its mission, its vision, its call, its life of faith, not just for its own sake, not just because we're here struggling through this transition time, not just for the sake of the members, or even for the sake of the people who live in our town. It is for the sake of every faith ancestor who lived before us, and for every faithful person who comes after us. We've got to step up and firmly put our hands on the chain of faith. Now, that's one of the reasons, I think, that congregations in transition often take a little time before they partner with a new pastor. Before they look at themselves, they look at it, their vision, their mission, their work, their worship, the context in which ministry takes place. Now, I know it's my 5th interim, plus some other kind of transition work. I know how eager you are to get on with it. And you know what? If we were Methodists, not that there's anything wrong with being a Methodist, but if we were a Methodist, the district superintendents would have already sent us a new pastor. And if we were Roman Catholics, the same thing might happen. You know, Roman Catholics can get a new pope in 3 weeks. That includes travel time for all the cardinals all over the world. But we're Presbyterians. And we've chosen, correctly, we hope, to take some time and to see how we best can grab on to this chain of faith. And so, guess what we do? You all know the answer to this. Right, we appoint a committee. That's okay, that's okay. This particular committee is called the Mission Study Team. They're assigned to help us do this task. Some of you have been able to be in an adult Sunday school class for the last few weeks, studying again the scriptural mandate for mission and ministry. This team also is gathering demographic data, because we all know the world isn't like it used to be. We need to know what the context of our mission and ministry is. Now, in September, there'll be an opportunity for a church-wide gathering during which everybody, that would be everybody, you know that word? Everybody, okay, this is good. To be together, to speak and to listen to one another, to share in small groups. How did this church begin? How did Westminster begin? What faithful folk do we remember here? What have been some of our mountaintop experiences? Where have we slogged through the valley? What do we believe God is calling us to do now and in the future? Where can we grab hold of the chain of faith? How can we live out our commitment to be in this together? My prayer is that all of you, each of us, can be a part of this process, for it will not be the same if you are not there. So, get ready. You have to empty your hands of all your other stuff. You can't be carrying a lot of stuff, because you have to step up and grab hold of the chain of faith. For apart from us, no one receives the full consummation of the promises of God. For indeed we are in this together. Thanks be to God.